7 miles down, in the blackest place on Earth, the water pressure could crush a school bus flat in seconds. You're about to go there. To Challenger Deep, the deepest point on the entire planet, deeper than Mount Everest, is tall. Down here, giant bugs the size of house cats crawl through the mud. A fish with no bones glides through darkness that has never once seen sunlight. Ancient chemistry bubbles up from volcanoes made of mud. Chemistry that might explain how life on Earth began. And in a place no human should ever reach, scientists keep finding trash. If this kind of mystery grabs you, hit like and subscribe. More of the ocean's darkest secrets are coming. Take a breath, hold on. We are going to the bottom of the world. Picture Mount Everest, the tallest mountain on the planet, standing 29,000 feet into the sky. Now flip it upside down and drop it into the ocean. The peak would vanish. It would keep sinking, and there would still be more than a mile of black water above it before it hit bottom. That bottom is real. It sits in the western Pacific Ocean, and it is called the Challenger Deep. Challenger Deep is the lowest point in every ocean on Earth. It drops about 36,000 feet below the surface, nearly 7 miles straight down. Drop a school bus off a boat right now and it would fall for close to an hour before it hit the seafloor. Scientists call this whole region the Mariana Trench. It stretches more than 1,500 miles, longer than the drive from New York to Denver. Picture a scar carved into the bottom of the ocean, shaped like a crescent moon, hiding in total darkness where almost no human has ever gone. Here is the strange part. We have better maps of the surface of Mars than we do of this trench. Space agencies have photographed the red planet down to the size of a car. Down here, on our own planet, huge sections of seafloor have never been mapped in detail, sitting unexplored right under ships that sail back and forth above it every single day. The first people to guess how deep it was used something almost embarrassingly simple. In the 1870s, a British Royal Navy ship called the Challenger dropped a weighted rope over the side and waited to feel it hit bottom. That is where the name Challenger Deep comes from. Sailors on deck, watching a rope disappear into black water, had no idea they had just found the lowest point on the entire surface of our planet. Today, scientists use sound instead of rope. A ship sends a beam of sound down into the water. The beam bounces off the seafloor and travels back up. By timing that round trip, scientists calculate the depth almost to the foot. It sounds simple, but the numbers keep shifting slightly every time someone tries again. The pressure down there is so intense that it bends sound waves and confuses even modern equipment. So why does this one place sit so much deeper than the rest of the ocean floor? The answer involves two giant slabs of rock called tectonic plates, the huge pieces that make up the surface of our planet. Near the Mariana Islands, one of these plates is sliding underneath another, diving down into the earth like a conveyor belt heading into darkness. That collision bends the seafloor into a crack deeper than anything else on the planet. This sounds like something from a science fiction movie, but it is happening right now, silently, thousands of feet under ships and airplanes and everyday life. Even the exact shape of the bottom stays a mystery. Challenger Deep is not one single hole. It splits into 3 separate basins, sitting side by side like 3 giant bowls carved into the seafloor. Scientists still cannot agree which of the 3 basins is actually the deepest. Every new survey brings back slightly different numbers, off by a few dozen feet, enough to keep the argument going year after year among people who study this for a living. And the deeper we go into this crack in the earth, the stranger everything gets. Waiting at the very bottom is a kind of pressure that would turn a human body into pulp in seconds. We are about to go there. Stand at the edge of a swimming pool and you barely notice the water pressing on your skin. Swim down 10 feet and your ears already start to ache. Now imagine swimming down 36,000 feet. At the bottom of the Mariana Trench, every single square inch of your body would feel the weight of about 8 tons pressing down on it. That is roughly the weight of a school bus, balanced on a space the size of a postage stamp, and it is pushing on every inch of you at once. Scientists have a simpler way to picture it. They say the pressure down there is like having 50 jumbo jets stacked directly on top of you, not one jet. 50 of them, nose to tail, their full weight resting on your shoulders. A human body was never built to survive that. Without protection, a person would be crushed in less time than it takes to blink. Here is where it gets stranger. That pressure is so extreme that it changes water itself. Normally, water does not compress. That is why hydraulic brakes in a car work at all, because the fluid inside them cannot be squeezed smaller. But at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, the pressure is so massive that water molecules actually get squeezed closer together. The water becomes almost 5% more compressed than water at the surface. The ocean, at its deepest point, is thicker than the ocean everywhere else on Earth. Submarines built for this kind of pressure look nothing like the submarines from World War II movies. Most military submarines can only survive a few thousand feet down before the hull would collapse like a soda can under a boot. To reach Challenger Deep, engineers had to build a submersible with walls of titanium several inches thick, shaped into a perfect sphere. A sphere spreads pressure evenly across its entire surface. Any flat panel, any sharp corner, any tiny flaw in the metal, and the pressure would find it instantly and tear the vessel apart. Pilots who have made the trip describe the sound as the scariest part. As the submersible sinks deeper, the metal hull creaks and groans under the rising pressure, like a giant fist slowly squeezing a can. Every strange noise makes a pilot wonder if this is the dive where the metal finally gives out. Engineers spend years testing these titanium spheres before a single human ever climbs inside. They run the metal through pressure chambers on land, forcing it to survive conditions even harsher than the trench itself over and over, searching for the tiniest weakness in the weld. A single hairline crack, invisible to the naked eye, could be the difference between a successful dive and a catastrophe nearly 7 miles beneath the surface, far beyond the reach of any rescue team on the planet. And yet, somehow, living creatures do not just survive down here, they thrive. Fish swim calmly through pressure that would flatten a tank. Their bodies are not fighting the pressure, they are built to let it pass straight through them, using a trick that took evolution millions of years to perfect. That trick is about to save a fish from being crushed into jelly, and it starts with something you would never expect. It starts with the fish having almost no bones at all. Close your eyes right now. Whatever you see behind your eyelids, some faint gray light, some shifting color, that is still more light than exists at the bottom of the Mariana Trench. Down there, it is not dim. It is not shadowy. It is absolute, total darkness, the kind of darkness a human eye has never experienced, because even on the darkest night on the surface, starlight still gets through. Sunlight is powerful, but it is not endless. As you sink below the ocean surface, the water swallows sunlight bit by bit. By about 600 feet down, red light is already gone, absorbed by the water above it. By around 3,000 feet, every color of light has disappeared completely. Scientists call this the midnight zone, and once you cross into it, no flashlight, no camera, no submarine window will ever catch a hint of natural sunlight again, no matter how far down you continue. The Mariana Trench sits more than 10 times deeper than where sunlight gives out. It exists in a kind of darkness so complete that some scientists compare it to being sealed inside a closet with no doors, no windows, and no cracks for light to sneak through, for your entire life. Scientists split the ocean into layers, almost like floors of a very tall, very dark building. Near the top sits the sunlight zone, home to nearly every fish most people have ever seen. Below that comes the twilight zone, then the midnight zone, then the abyss. The Mariana Trench occupies the very last floor, a layer scientists call the Hadal Zone, named after Hades, the ancient underworld. Nothing sits below it, there is nowhere left to go. Temperature drops just as dramatically. Near the surface, the Pacific Ocean can feel like a warm bath. But heat behaves like light, it fades with depth. By the time you reach the trench floor, the water hovers between 34 and 39 degrees Fahrenheit, just a few degrees above freezing. It never gets colder in winter or warmer in summer, it never changes at all. The trench exists in an eternal, unchanging, freezing night that has lasted for millions of years and will last for millions more. Here is what makes this darkness even stranger. Without light, there can be no plants. Without plants, there is no normal food chain. On the surface of our planet, nearly everything alive depends, in some way, on sunlight. Down in the Mariana Trench, the sun might as well not exist at all. So how does anything survive down here? The answer falls from above, slowly like snow. Scientists call it marine snow, a constant drizzle of dead plankton, waste, and tiny scraps of organic material sinking down from the sunlit world far above. It can take weeks for a single flake of marine snow to drift all the way to the bottom of the trench. By the time it lands, it has traveled through a world with no sun for longer than most vacations last. This thin, slow rain of scraps is the only meal ticket for every creature living in this crushing darkness. It is not much, it barely qualifies as food at all. And yet, an entire thriving world of strange animals has learned to survive on it, adapting to permanent darkness in ways that would have sounded impossible only a few decades ago. The first humans to see this world firsthand did not arrive with modern robots or high-definition cameras. They arrived in a metal ball, dropped from a ship more than 60 years ago. What they found down there changed science forever. On January 23, 1960, two men climbed into a metal sphere barely bigger than a closet and began sinking into the Pacific Ocean. Their names were Jacques Picard and Don Walsh. Their vessel was called the Trieste, a strange-looking submersible with a giant float on top, shaped almost like a balloon, and a tiny crew capsule hanging underneath like a basket. The trip down took nearly 5 hours. As the Trieste sank deeper and deeper, the temperature inside the capsule dropped, the air grew damp, and the pressure outside climbed to numbers no human vessel had ever faced. At one point, a thick window pane actually cracked from the pressure, and the entire capsule shook violently. The sound echoed through the tiny metal sphere like a gunshot. Neither man could see exactly what had failed, or whether the crack would keep spreading the deeper they sank. Most people would have turned back right there. Picard and Walsh kept going, trusting a vessel that had just proven, in the worst possible way, that it was not invincible. When they finally reached the bottom, nearly 36,000 feet down, they became the first humans in history to touch the deepest point on Earth. They sat in silence, staring out a small window into a world no person had ever seen. A world that had existed in permanent darkness since long before humans walked the planet. For 20 minutes they watched, and according to Picard, something swam past the window. He described a flat, pale creature, something that looked to him like a small flounder, gliding along the sea floor in the beam of the light. If true, it meant fish with backbones could survive at pressure strong enough to crush steel. Not every scientist believes what Picard saw was actually a fish. Some researchers now suspect it may have been a sea cucumber, a soft, slow-moving creature that can look strange when caught in a dim light through thick glass. To this day, no one can say for certain which one it was. The only two witnesses have passed away, and the sighting lasted only seconds. What is certain is what happened next. The two men fired off a signal, dropped their ballast weights, and rose back to the surface. They had proven something enormous. Life could exist in the most extreme environment on the entire planet. Picard later wrote about the moment with genuine emotion, describing decades of scientific debate finally settled in a single glance through a small, cracked window. Biologists had argued for years over whether the crushing pressure at these depths made complex life completely impossible. In one 20-minute stretch, sitting in silence at the bottom of the world, two men appeared to answer a question science had struggled with for generations. You might expect that after a discovery, this massive submarines would return again and again to study the trench floor. That is not what happened. Instead, the Challenger Deep sat untouched by human eyes for more than 50 years. No government, no research team, no explorer went back down. The most extreme place on Earth became one of the loneliest places on Earth, visited once and then forgotten, while humans focused their attention on space instead of the deep ocean stretching beneath their own ships. In March of 2012, a director best known for filmmaking movies about sinking ships and blue aliens climbed into a submarine he had spent years secretly building in his own backyard. His name was James Cameron, and his machine looked nothing like any submarine before it. Instead of a wide, flat shape, it stood tall and narrow, like a bright green torpedo standing on its end, built to slice through the water and sink as fast as possible. Cameron piloted the vessel completely alone. No crew, no backup pilot. Just one man folded into a steel capsule barely large enough to sit in, sinking through 7 miles of freezing black water with only the hum of his own machine for company. Cameron spent years and reportedly millions of his own dollars developing this vessel in near total secrecy alongside a small team of engineers. Every part had to be custom built, since nothing off the shelf could survive a dive this extreme. The submarine carried its own robotic arm, its own lighting rig powerful enough to cut through total darkness, and enough backup systems that if one failed, Cameron could still make it back to the surface alive, alone, with no one nearby to help. The dive down took roughly 2.5 hours. Cameron later described the descent as strangely peaceful at first. Then, at a certain depth, all sense of direction disappeared. There was no light, no visible surface above, no seafloor below, just an endless black in every direction, pressing in on every side of the tiny capsule. When he finally touched down on the seafloor, Cameron became the first person to reach the bottom of the Mariana Trench alone, and only the second expedition ever to reach it at all. He spent nearly 3 hours exploring the bottom, filming footage and collecting samples, far longer than the 20 minutes Piccard and Walsh had managed back in 1960. What Cameron found surprised him. He expected a barren, lifeless plain. Instead, cameras picked up tiny shrimp-like creatures drifting through the mud, and delicate structures on the seafloor that hinted at a fragile living ecosystem no one had properly studied before. The trench was not empty. It was simply waiting for someone to look closely enough. At one point during the dive, a hydraulic leak forced Cameron to cut the trip shorter than originally planned, sending him back toward the surface faster than intended. Even with the mission cut short, the footage and samples he brought back kept scientists busy analyzing new data for months afterward, proof that even a shortened trip to this depth could reshape what researchers thought they knew. Cameron's dive reignited global interest in deep ocean exploration almost overnight. After sitting untouched for over 50 years, the Challenger Deep suddenly became a target again, not just for scientists, but for wealthy adventurers chasing a new kind of record. News networks around the world covered the dive live, turning a place almost nobody thought about into a genuine global headline for the first time in decades. Cameron later described the achievement as more difficult in some ways than anything he had filmed for the movies that made him famous, because this time there were no special effects, no safety nets, and no second takes if something went wrong 7 miles beneath the surface. Within a few years, a very different kind of explorer would make this same trip, not once, but again and again and again, turning a once-in-a-lifetime dive into something closer to a regular commute. Most people who reach the deepest point on Earth do it once and consider their life complete. Victor Vescovo did it 15 times. A retired naval officer and investor from Texas, Vescovo funded and piloted a submersible called the Limiting Factor, a vessel built specifically to survive repeated trips to the bottom of the ocean, again and again, without falling apart. Between 2019 and 2022, Vescovo descended into Challenger Deep over and over, mapping different sections of the trench floor in detail no one had managed before. On one of his early dives, he broke Cameron's depth record, reaching slightly deeper into the trench than anyone in history. But depth records were not really the point. Vescovo was building the first real map of a place humans barely understood, one dive at a time. His submarine carried scientists on many of these trips, turning a death-defying stunt into something closer to a floating research lab. Cameras recorded new species. Sensors measured chemistry no one had sampled before. Slowly, dive by dive, the Challenger Deep stopped being a single deep hole on a map and became a place with actual geography, actual features, and actual neighborhoods of strange animals living in specific parts of the trench. The Challenger deep dives were only part of a much bigger project. Vescovo set out to reach the deepest point in all 5 of the world's oceans, a mission he called the 5 Deeps Expedition. Before him, nobody had ever completed that full journey. Piece by piece, he crossed off the Atlantic, the Southern, the Indian, and the Arctic Oceans before finishing with the deepest dive of them all, back in the Pacific, at the very bottom of the Mariana Trench. Vescovo was not the only country racing to the bottom. In November of 2020, a Chinese crewed submersible called the Fenduje, which means striver, carried a team of scientists down to a depth of over 10,900 meters, becoming one of the deepest crewed dives ever completed. Unlike earlier missions built mostly for record breaking, the Fenduje was designed for repeated scientific missions, ferrying researchers down to collect samples as routinely as a research ship collects water at the surface. The submersible carried a crew of 3 on that historic dive, and the mission was broadcast live, letting people around the world watch scientists work at the bottom of the ocean in something close to real time, an experience that would have been unthinkable during the lonely, silent decades that followed the very first dive back in 1960. In under a decade, the Mariana Trench went from a place visited exactly twice in 50 years to a place visited by different countries and private explorers on a regular basis. Submarines now sit on the trench floor collecting mud, filming animals, and testing chemicals almost as often as scientists study a coral reef near the surface. This rapid shift changed the pace of discovery almost overnight. Where earlier decades produced maybe one meaningful expedition every 10 or 20 years, researchers can now plan multiple missions within a single calendar year, comparing fresh data against results collected only months earlier, instead of wading through another long, silent gap in exploration. And with every new trip, researchers kept running into the same impossible question. If the pressure down here could crush a submarine hull built from solid titanium, how was a soft, delicate fish swimming around completely unharmed, gliding through the exact same crushing water like it was nothing at all? 8,000 feet deeper than most submarines dared to go, in complete darkness and crushing pressure, a small pink fish drifts calmly along the seafloor. It looks almost soft, like a tadpole made of jelly, with translucent skin and no scales at all. Scientists call it the Mariana snailfish, and it holds a record no other backboned animal on the planet can claim. It is the deepest living fish ever confirmed by science. Researchers first filmed swarms of these fish gliding through the Mariana Trench at depths beyond 8,000 meters, roughly 5 miles down. That might not sound shocking until you realize what happens to most fish at that depth. Below a certain point, biologists once assumed fish simply could not exist at all, that the pressure would break down their bodies at a cellular level no matter how tough their skin or bones might be. The Mariana snailfish broke that assumption completely. Cameras caught them swimming in loose groups, hunting for tiny shrimp-like amphipods along the muddy floor. behaving less like fragile survivors and more like the dominant predator of their strange, lightless neighborhood. Far from clinging to life at the edge of survival, these fish appeared completely at home. Up close, the snailfish looks nothing like the sleek fish you might picture from a nature documentary. Its body is soft and slightly see-through, almost pearlescent, like a bar of wet soap. It has no swim bladder, the gas-filled organ most fish use to control buoyancy, because a gas-filled organ would be crushed instantly at this depth. Instead, its body is built almost entirely from water and fat, materials that do not compress the way gas does, letting pressure pass straight through instead of crushing anything inside. Its skeleton tells an even stranger story. Rather than hard, calcified bone like a human skeleton, the snailfish has a soft, flexible, almost rubbery skeleton, more like cartilage than bone. Hard bone becomes brittle and unstable under extreme pressure. Soft, flexible cartilage simply bends and adapts, refusing to crack under weight that would shatter a steel beam. Scientists studying the Mariana snailfish's genetic code found something else remarkable. Certain genes related to bone formation appeared to have shut down entirely over the course of evolution, almost as if the species slowly traded a strong skeleton for a flexible one, because flexibility, not strength, was the actual key to survival at these depths. None of this happened by accident or in a single generation. It took millions of years of evolution, generation after generation, slowly reshaping this fish's body until it became perfectly suited to a place that should be lethal to any backboned animal. The result is a creature that looks fragile, but might be one of the toughest survivors on planet Earth. Bring a Mariana snailfish up to the surface, and that toughness disappears almost instantly. The same soft, flexible body that lets it thrive under crushing pressure cannot handle the sudden lack of it. Specimens hauled up in nets or collection traps often arrive looking collapsed and shapeless, nothing like the sleek, gliding animal filmed alive on the trench floor. The fish is not built for our world, it is built entirely for its own. But the snailfish did not evolve alone down here. It shares this crushing world with an army of small, hungry scavengers, creatures that swarm the seafloor in numbers so large that entire patches of mud seem to move on their own. Turn on an underwater camera at the bottom of the Mariana Trench and drop bait onto the seafloor. Within minutes, the mud around it appears to come alive. Dozens, sometimes hundreds of small shrimp-like creatures swarm in from every direction, crawling and swimming over each other in a feeding frenzy. These are amphipods, and down here they may be the most successful animals on the entire planet. Amphipods are small crustaceans, distant cousins of shrimp and crabs, found in nearly every ocean on Earth. Most amphipods living near the surface are barely noticeable, tiny specks easily missed by the naked eye. But in the crushing darkness of the Mariana Trench, amphipods do not just survive. They dominate, appearing in numbers that overwhelm every other creature nearby whenever food drifts down from above. Food is desperately scarce this deep. A dead fish falling from the surface might be the biggest meal this ecosystem sees in months. When a scrap of food finally reaches the trench floor, amphipods react almost instantly, swarming from every direction like a silent, hungry crowd rushing toward the smell of fresh bread. Within hours, a large carcass can be stripped down to almost nothing. Their success comes down to a few simple survival tricks. Amphipods have flexible exoskeletons that bend under pressure instead of cracking. Their bodies contain special proteins that keep their cells stable even when squeezed by forces that would tear apart ordinary tissue. And because amphipods will eat almost anything organic that reaches the bottom, they never have to compete with picky predators looking for something specific. Researchers dropping baited traps into the trench have sometimes pulled up thousands of amphipods from a single cage left on the bottom for only a few hours. A swarm so dense that scientists had to sort through the catch in batches, just to properly count and study individual specimens back on the ship. This scavenging army does more than just survive. It quietly recycles nutrients across one of the most extreme food chains on the planet, breaking down scraps of food into pieces small enough for even simpler organisms to use. Without amphipods patrolling the trench floor, dead material would simply pile up in the mud instead of feeding the wider ecosystem. Researchers studying these tiny scavengers have found them at nearly every depth scientists have managed to sample, from the shallow edges of the trench all the way down to the absolute bottom of Challenger Deep itself. No other group of animals seems quite as comfortable across such an enormous range of pressure, making amphipods something close to the ultimate generalists of the deep ocean, equally at home a mile down or 7 miles down. Their bodies are surprisingly delicate looking for such tough survivors, thin and segmented, more closely resembling a tiny lobster than anything intimidating. That fragile appearance is deceptive. Underneath the surface, their tissue is packed with specialized molecules that keep proteins from collapsing under pressure that would tear apart cells in almost any surface-dwelling animal, a chemical trick refined across millions of years spent scavenging in total darkness. Most amphipods in the trench are barely the size of your fingernail, but not all of them stayed small. Somewhere in the darkness of the deepest trenches on Earth, this same tiny creature grew into something almost unrecognizable, stretching into a monster more than 10 times the normal size, and nobody fully understands why. Imagine a shrimp the length of a school ruler, armored, powerful, and built to survive some of the harshest pressure on Earth. That creature is real. Scientists call it the supergiant amphipod, and it can grow beyond 11 inches long, 10 to 20 times bigger than its ordinary relatives living in shallow water near the coast. Researchers first stumbled onto supergiant amphipods almost by accident, while lowering baited traps into deep ocean trenches around the Pacific, including the Mariana Trench. When the traps came back up, scientists expected the usual tiny scavengers. Instead, they found creatures so large that some researchers assumed at first that something had gone wrong with the trap. This kind of jump in size has a name. Biologists call it deep-sea gigantism, a strange pattern where certain deep ocean animals grow far larger than their shallow water cousins. It is not just amphipods. Giant isopods, distant relatives of the pillbugs you might find under a rock in your backyard, can grow to the size of a house cat in these same extreme depths. Nobody has fully solved why this happens. One leading idea suggests that colder temperatures slow down metabolism, letting animals live longer and keep growing for years instead of dying young. Another idea points to the near total absence of predators strong enough to hunt something that large in a place with barely any food to support big hunters in the first place. A third idea suggests that oxygen levels in extremely cold, deep water allow cells to grow larger than they safely could near the warmer surface. Researchers testing these ideas have compared supergiant amphipods living in different trenches around the Pacific, hoping to find a consistent pattern connecting size to depth, temperature, or oxygen level. So far, the results have only deepened the puzzle, since some of the largest specimens ever recorded turned up in trenches that do not perfectly match any single explanation on its own. Whatever the true reason or combination of reasons, deep-sea gigantism turns the trench into something like a funhouse mirror version of familiar animals. Creatures that would fit in the palm of your hand near a beach grow into armored giants once they settle into the crushing dark of the Hadal Zone, the scientific name for the deepest ocean environments on Earth. Supergiant amphipods use their size to their advantage, aggressively defending bait and scraps of food from smaller scavengers nearby. In a world where a single meal might be the only food for months, being the biggest animal in the room is not just impressive, it might be the difference between surviving another year and starving in the dark. Giant isopods, their armored distant cousins, take this same pattern even further. Some specimens pulled from deep trap surveys have measured over a foot long, curled into a shape almost identical to the small grey pillbugs found under a rock in an ordinary backyard, just scaled up as if someone had inflated the animal like a balloon. Seeing one crawl across a camera feed for the first time, most researchers admit their instinct is to assume the footage has been faked. As strange as a giant shrimp sounds, it is not even the strangest thing crawling across the trench floor. Somewhere in that same mud lives something even harder to believe, a living creature made of just one single cell, yet somehow large enough to hold in your hand. Every living thing you have ever met is made of trillions of tiny cells working together. Your body, a dog, a tree, all built from an almost unimaginable number of microscopic building blocks. Now picture a single cell, just one, growing large enough to sit in the palm of your hand. In the Mariana Trench, that creature actually exists, and it is called a xenophyophore. Xenophyophores are giant single-celled organisms, a type of protist related to amoebas, but stretched to a size that seems to break the normal rules of biology. Most single cells on Earth are invisible without a microscope. Xenophyophores can grow several inches wide, some even larger, making them among the biggest single cells known to science. Scientists first spotted xenophyophores clustered across the deepest parts of the Mariana Trench floor, sitting between roughly 26,000 and 36,000 feet down. At these depths, they build delicate, intricate structures out of sediment and minerals, almost like tiny sculpted homes glued together from mud, sand, and tiny mineral grains scattered across the seafloor. Here is what makes them even stranger. Because they are technically a single cell, xenophyophores never had to solve the problems that multicellular animals face, like building organs, muscles, or a nervous system. Instead, this one giant cell filters tiny particles of food directly out of the water and sediment around it, absorbing nutrients the way a sponge soaks up water without a mouth, a stomach, or a brain of any kind. Researchers studying the trench floor have found that xenophyophores are not rare oddities. In some areas, they carpet the seafloor in surprising numbers, creating tiny sediment structures that other small creatures use for shelter. In a strange way, this giant single cell might function almost like a coral reef does near the surface, quietly shaping the neighborhood around it for other animals to use. Scientists collecting these organisms have to work with extraordinary care, since a structure this delicate can fall apart the instant it is disturbed by a robotic arm or a sudden current. Even a small mistake during collection can turn a perfectly preserved specimen into an unrecognizable clump of sediment before it ever reaches a laboratory for proper study. Nobody expected complexity like this from a single cell. For decades, scientists assumed the deepest ocean floor was mostly barren mud, too extreme and too starved of food to support anything beyond the simplest bacteria. Xenophyophores proved otherwise, showing that even the most basic form of life can grow astonishingly large and astonishingly complex when given millions of years and almost no competition. Xenophyophores hold one more strange ability. Researchers have found that these giant cells can absorb and concentrate heavy metals and even mildly radioactive elements from the sediment around them, tolerating substances that would poison nearly every other form of life on the planet. Nobody fully understands how a single cell manages to survive this kind of chemical exposure without falling apart. But some scientists now wonder whether studying that tolerance could eventually help researchers understand cellular resilience in entirely new ways. If a single cell can grow to the size of your hand down here, it raises an obvious question. What happens when actual, fully formed animals with eyes, mouths, and nervous systems try to survive in this same crushing world? The answer turns out to be one of the strangest gallery of creatures found anywhere on the planet, starting with something that still does not even have an official name. In 2016, aboard the NOAA research vessel Okeanos Explorer, a team exploring an underwater mountain near the Mariana Trench called the Enigma Seamount spotted something drifting through their camera lights that nobody in the control room could immediately identify. It was a jellyfish, almost completely see-through, with two separate sets of tentacles trailing behind it, one short, one impossibly long, both barely visible against the black water. The footage spread quickly among scientists and ocean enthusiasts once it was shared publicly, racking up views from people who had never given a second thought to deep sea biology before stumbling across the clip. To this day, this jellyfish has never been given an official scientific name. Researchers are still not entirely certain which species it belongs to, or whether it might be something science has never formally documented before. What makes this jellyfish so eerie is not just its appearance, it is its stillness. In the footage, the creature barely moves at all, holding almost perfectly motionless in the water for long stretches of time. Scientists believe the stillness might actually be a hunting strategy. Many deep-sea predators rely on detecting motion in the water to find prey. By staying nearly frozen in place, this jellyfish may be avoiding detection entirely, letting smaller animals swim close enough to become an easy meal. Jellyfish have existed on Earth for more than 500 million years. Long before dinosaurs, long before trees, long before anything with a backbone crawled onto land. In that time, they spread into nearly every ocean environment on the planet, from sunny tropical shallows to the crushing darkness of the Hadal Zone. Finding one this deep is not entirely shocking. Finding one this strange, still unnamed and largely unstudied, is a reminder of just how much remains hidden in this trench. The Enigma Seamount, where this jellyfish was first filmed, sits close enough to the Mariana Trench that scientists consider it part of the same broader ecosystem. Expeditions exploring the seamount routinely capture footage of animals researchers cannot immediately identify, sometimes multiple unidentified creatures during a single dive. Most of that footage simply gets archived, waiting for a specialist with the right expertise to eventually review it and decide whether the world just met a species nobody has ever named before. Unlike many creatures on this list, this jellyfish has no bones to dissolve under pressure, no swim bladder to worry about, and barely any solid structure at all. Its body is almost entirely water, which may be exactly why it can drift through some of the most extreme pressure on the planet without any special adaptation at all. Sometimes, surviving the impossible, it does not require becoming tougher. Sometimes it just means becoming almost nothing solid to begin with. Scientists have filmed this jellyfish only a handful of times. Every new expedition into these waters raises the odds of spotting it again, or possibly discovering it is not alone down here. Marine biologists reviewing the original footage have noted several small details that make formal classification unusually difficult, including the unusual arrangement of its two sets of tentacles, a pattern that does not cleanly match any previously documented jellyfish family. Until researchers manage to collect an actual physical sample, rather than relying on video alone, the ghost jellyfish is likely to remain exactly what it is right now, a genuine mystery drifting through the dark. Somewhere between the sunlit surface and the crushing dark of the Mariana Trench swims a fish that looks like it belongs in a science fiction film. Its head is completely transparent, like a dome of glass, and through that clear skin you can actually see its eyes glowing green inside, along with parts of its own brain. This is the barrel-eye fish, and it might be one of the strangest animals ever caught on camera. Scientists did not even know the barrel-eye fish existed until 1939, when one was accidentally pulled up from about 2,500 feet below the surface. For decades afterward, researchers only ever saw damaged specimens hauled up in nets, their delicate see-through heads already crushed or torn by the trip to the surface. Nobody actually knew what a healthy barrel-eye fish looked like alive in its natural habitat until modern submersibles finally filmed one swimming freely in the deep ocean. That first video revealed something researchers had completely misunderstood for decades. The two dark spots near the front of the fish, which scientists originally assumed were its eyes, turned out to be something else entirely, structures related to smell. The actual eyes are the two glowing green orbs sitting deep inside its transparent head, tube-shaped and pointed straight upward, like a pair of periscopes built into its skull. Those tube-shaped eyes exist for one very specific reason. In near total darkness, faint light still trickles down from far above, and prey animals swimming overhead create small, dark silhouettes against that faint glow. By pointing its eyes straight up through a clear dome instead of out to the sides, the barrel-eye fish can detect the shadow of potential prey passing above it, almost like watching for a person walking past the skylight from underneath. Here is the detail that still puzzles scientists. The barrel-eye's mouth sits below and in front of its head, not directly under its upward pointing eyes. To actually catch prey it has spotted above, the fish needs to rotate those tube-shaped eyes forward inside its transparent dome, repositioning them without moving its entire body, something almost no other fish on the planet is known to do. Researchers still know very little about how barrel-eye fish reproduce, how long they live, or how many actually exist in trenches like the Mariana. Every sighting remains rare enough to make headlines among marine biologists decades after the species was first identified. In a place already filled with bizarre creatures, a fish with a transparent, glass-like head still manages to feel like something from another planet entirely. Part of the reason this fish stayed hidden for so long comes down to its fragile design. A dome built from clear gelatinous tissue simply does not survive being hauled up in a net from thousands of feet down. It collapses, tears or clouds over long before it ever reaches the deck of a ship. Only cameras mounted on slow, careful submersibles approaching gently instead of scooping the animal up were ever able to capture what a living barrel-eye fish truly looks like. But even a see-through head is not the strangest survival trick hiding in these waters. Deeper still, in colder water, a creature nicknamed after a legendary monster of the night has been quietly proving that not every predator down here needs to bite to survive. Its name sounds like something built for nightmares. The vampire squid, discovered more than a century ago, earned its unsettling nickname from deep red skin and a webbed cloak of tissue stretching between its arms, almost like a cape. Early scientists who first examined preserved specimens assumed they had found a vicious predator lurking in the deep ocean. They were completely wrong. Despite the terrifying name, the vampire squid does not hunt, does not chase prey, and has never been observed biting anything at all. Instead, it survives almost entirely on falling scraps, catching drifting bits of dead organic material called marine snow. Using two long, thin, sticky filaments, it can extend far beyond its body, like fishing lines cast into the dark. Rather than fighting off predators with beaks or sharp claws, the vampire squid relies on one of the strangest defense systems ever documented in the animal kingdom. When threatened, it can turn its webbed arms completely inside out, covering its own body in rows of soft, fleshy spines, transforming from a sleek swimmer into something resembling a spiky, unappetizing pine cone within seconds. If that trick fails, the vampire squid has a backup plan even stranger than the first. Unlike octopus relatives that squirt dark ink to escape danger, vampire squid living in total darkness would gain nothing from a cloud of black ink nobody can see. Instead, evolution gave them something far more useful down here. They release a cloud of glowing, bioluminescent mucus, a shimmering trap of blue-green light that can confuse or distract a predator for several seconds. giving the vampire squid just enough time to disappear into the surrounding darkness. Producing light is actually common among creatures living in the deepest parts of the ocean. Scientists estimate that a majority of animals living below roughly 3,000 feet generate some form of their own light, called bioluminescence, using specialized chemical reactions inside their bodies. In a world with zero natural sunlight, animals essentially had to invent their own. Researchers studying the vampire squid's glowing defense have found that the light-producing organs covering its arms can be triggered individually or all at once, letting the animal choose between a single distracting flash or a full body burst of light depending on how serious the threat actually seems. That level of control, fine-tuned over millions of years, turns a simple defense mechanism into something closer to a calculated response. The vampire squid has barely changed in appearance for tens of millions of years, surviving mass extinctions that wiped out countless other species across the planet. Scientists sometimes call it a living fossil, a creature that found a survival strategy so effective millions of years ago that evolution simply never needed to change it. Most vampire squid grow to only about 6 inches long, small enough to fit inside a shoebox. Yet they survive in a layer of ocean scientists call the oxygen minimum zone, water with barely enough oxygen to support most other animals. While faster predators avoid this suffocating layer entirely, the slow, low-energy vampire squid thrives there, using the near-total absence of competition and predators as its own kind of quiet advantage. Not every ancient survivor down here relies on tricks and light shows. Somewhere deeper in these waters lurks a predator that has barely changed in over 100 million years, and unlike the gentle vampire squid, this one is built entirely to attack. Long before dinosaurs went extinct, before flowers first bloomed, before most of the animal kingdom we recognize today had even evolved, a strange shark was already patrolling the deep ocean. That shark still exists today, almost completely unchanged, and it is called the goblin shark. Goblin sharks belong to a family of sharks stretching back roughly 125 million years, making them one of the oldest surviving shark lineages on the planet. While countless other species evolved, adapted, or went extinct entirely, the goblin shark's basic body plan barely changed at all, a design so effective that evolution apparently saw no reason to improve it. Its appearance alone explains the unsettling nickname. The goblin shark has a long, flattened snout stretching out in front of its face like a blade, and jaws that do not sit fixed in place the way a human jaw does. When it strikes prey, its jaws can shoot forward out of its mouth in a fraction of a second, snapping shut around a fish, before instantly retracting back into place, almost like a mechanical trap firing and resetting. That long snout is not just for looks, it is covered in thousands of microscopic sensors called the ampullae of Lorenzini, capable of detecting the faint electrical signals every living creature naturally gives off simply by moving its muscles. In total darkness, where eyesight becomes almost useless, this electrical sense lets the goblin shark detect prey hiding in mud or drifting nearby, without ever needing to see it directly. Goblin sharks are rarely seen alive by humans, mostly because they live so deep and so far from areas humans normally explore. Most of what scientists know comes from sharks accidentally caught in deep-sea fishing nets, hauled up from waters far below where sunlight reaches. Because their unusual pink, translucent skin bruises easily and their bodies are built for extreme pressure, most goblin sharks pulled to the surface die within hours, making it nearly impossible to study healthy, living specimens in a laboratory. Fishermen off the coast of Japan have occasionally caught goblin sharks accidentally in nets set for entirely different species, giving researchers some of the only opportunities to examine a fresh specimen up close. Each accidental catch becomes a small scientific event, since a genuinely healthy, undamaged goblin shark remains one of the rarest sights in all of marine biology, decades after the species was first properly described. In a trench already filled with creatures that look like museum exhibits of ancient life, the goblin shark stands out as a genuine time capsule, a hunter that perfected its design so long ago that dinosaurs would have recognized its shape if they had ever crossed paths in the deep. Its odd, pink coloring adds to the mystery. Unlike most sharks, which use gray or brown skin to blend into open water, the goblin shark's skin appears pink because its blood vessels sit unusually close to the surface, visible right through nearly translucent skin. In a place with zero sunlight, camouflage from color barely matters at all. One more sign that this ancient hunter evolved for a world built entirely around darkness rather than sight. And it is far from the only ancient hunting trick still working perfectly in these waters, because just beyond the goblin shark's territory, another predator has turned its own body into a glowing trap. Deep in the darkest layers of the ocean swims a creature so unsettling it inspired one of the most famous monsters in modern animation. The black sea devil, a type of anglerfish, hunts using a single glowing lure dangling from its forehead, dangling in the black water like a tiny, irresistible star in a sky with no other light at all. For decades, scientists only knew the black sea devil from dead specimens hauled up in deep sea nets, their bodies already damaged by the trip to the surface. Nobody had ever filmed one alive, swimming naturally in its own habitat, until 2014, when researchers at the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute finally captured live footage using a submersible robot exploring deep water off the coast of California. That footage revealed a creature built almost entirely around one deadly strategy. The glowing lure sits on the end of a thin filament attached to its head. Powered by bioluminescent bacteria, the fish deliberately hosts inside its own body, in a genuinely cooperative relationship between two completely different species. The anglerfish gives the bacteria a safe home and a steady supply of nutrients. In exchange, the bacteria produce the exact glow the fish needs to survive. Small prey animals, drawn toward any source of light in a world with none, swim closer and closer to investigate. The moment they drift within range, the black sea devil strikes with astonishing speed, its enormous jaws snapping open far wider than its actual body size, engulfing prey nearly as large as the anglerfish itself in a single motion. Its stomach can stretch to remarkable proportions, letting it hold onto a rare, oversized meal for weeks afterward. In an environment where the next opportunity to eat might not arrive for a long time, this stretching ability functions almost like a built-in pantry, letting the fish survive on a single lucky catch far longer than most animals its size ever could. Its body looks almost entirely built for this one ambushing. Weak, thin muscles make it a poor long-distance swimmer, but that hardly matters. Rather than chasing prey across open water, burning precious energy in a place where meals are scarce, the black sea devil simply waits motionless, letting its glowing lure do all the work while it conserves every ounce of energy for the split-second strike that follows. Female black sea devils are the ones you typically see, growing several inches long with their signature glowing lure. Males are drastically smaller, sometimes just a fraction of the female's size, and in one of the strangest mating strategies in the entire animal kingdom, some anglerfish males permanently fuse onto a female's body, their tissues literally merging together, their own organs slowly breaking down until only reproductive cells remain, becoming a living, attached source of reproductive cells for the rest of their lives. Scientists believe this bizarre strategy solved a very real survival problem. In a world this dark, this empty, and this enormous, finding a mate at all is already close to a miracle. Fusing permanently, the instant a male finally finds a female, guarantees neither one ever has to search again. In a place with barely any food and zero natural light, evolution did not just create predators that adapted to darkness, it created hunters that turned darkness itself into the greatest weapon. And the same trench that shaped these bizarre, glowing predators is also, deep beneath the mud they hunt across, quietly brewing something even stranger, chemistry rising up from inside the earth itself. Picture a volcano. Most people imagine fire, glowing lava, and thick clouds of ash exploding into the sky. Now picture a volcano that erupts cold, grey mud instead, rising slowly from cracks in the seafloor near the Mariana Trench, some growing wider than 30 miles across and taller than a small mountain. These are called serpentinite mud volcanoes, and they are unlike almost anything else found on the surface of our planet. These strange formations sit near the edge of the trench in a region called the forearc, where one of Earth's giant tectonic plates is slowly sliding underneath another. As the descending plate gets crushed and heated deep underground, water trapped inside its rock gets squeezed out, along with minerals from deep inside the Earth's mantle, the thick layer of rock lying beneath the planet's crust. When that water reacts with mantle rock, it triggers a chemical transformation called serpentinization, turning ordinary rock into a soft, greenish mineral called serpentine. The result rises slowly toward the seafloor as thick, oozing mud, eventually breaking through the surface and spreading outward in massive underwater mounds, unlike any volcano most people have ever heard of. Here is the part that stunned chemists. This slow, cold chemical reaction happening deep inside these mud volcanoes naturally produces hydrogen gas and simple organic molecules, the same basic chemical building blocks life on Earth is believed to have originally needed billions of years ago. No sunlight required, no surface chemistry involved, just rock, water, and pressure quietly assembling the raw ingredients for life in total darkness. Scientists have found thriving colonies of bacteria living inside and around these mud volcanoes, organisms that survive entirely on the chemical energy released by this reaction, instead of relying on sunlight or falling scraps of food from above. This process is called chemosynthesis, and it may represent one of the oldest, most fundamental survival strategies life on Earth ever developed. At least 10 of these mud volcanoes remain actively erupting along the Mariana forearc today, some stretching more than 30 miles wide and rising nearly 2 miles above the surrounding seafloor, tall enough that if you set one down on land, it would rank among the largest mountains on the continent nearest to you. Researchers exploring these sites have found clams, tube worms, and other specialized animals clustered directly around the vents, feeding on bacteria instead of anything resembling a normal meal. Studying the fluids seeping from these volcanoes requires specialized sampling gear capable of sealing samples the moment they leave the seafloor, before the extreme temperature and chemistry inside can change during the long trip back to a waiting ship on the surface. Some researchers now believe environments almost exactly like this, warm, mineral-rich water reacting with ancient rock deep underground, might be exactly where life on Earth first began billions of years ago, long before the first plant ever captured a beam of sunlight. If that theory holds up, the slow, oozing mud volcanoes scattered around the Mariana Trench might be quietly recreating the very first chemical spark that eventually led to every living thing on this planet, including you. And if that chemistry could spark life once, here on Earth in total darkness, deep beneath the ocean floor, an even bigger question naturally follows. Could the exact same kind of chemistry be happening right now at this very moment, somewhere else entirely, on a world far beyond our own? Hundreds of millions of miles from Earth, orbiting the planet Jupiter, sits a small, icy moon called Europa. Its surface looks like a cracked eggshell, a frozen crust of ice stretched across the entire moon. But underneath that ice, scientists believe an entire ocean is hiding, possibly containing more liquid water than every ocean on Earth combined. Europa is not the only icy world hiding a secret ocean. Saturn's moon Enceladus shoots massive geysers of water vapor out through cracks in its icy surface, plumes so powerful that spacecraft have flown directly through them and sampled the spray. Both of these frozen moons appear to share something in common with the bottom of the Mariana Trench, a hidden ocean sealed away from sunlight, sitting directly above warm, mineral-rich rock. This connection is not just a coincidence scientists find interesting. It is a genuine research strategy. Space agencies studying whether alien life could exist on these icy moons have started sending robotic vehicles down into the deepest, darkest trenches on Earth, using our own ocean floor as the closest possible stand-in for an ocean that might exist on a completely different planet. The logic makes sense once you think it through. If chemosynthesis, the process that lets bacteria near mud volcanoes survive on chemical energy instead of sunlight, can support entire ecosystems in the darkest parts of Earth's ocean, there is no obvious reason the exact same process could not support simple life in the dark ocean hidden beneath Europa's ice, or swirling inside the icy jets erupting from Enceladus. Engineers have even tested prototype submarines and robots in Earth's deepest trenches specifically to prepare for future missions to these icy moons, treating the crushing pressure and total darkness of our own ocean floor as the closest training ground available anywhere on the planet. Every new creature found thriving near a mud volcano in the Mariana Trench becomes one more piece of evidence that alien life, if it exists at all, might not need sunlight to survive. Some researchers involved in this work describe the Mariana Trench as the closest thing humanity has to an alien ocean without ever leaving home. A place where testing equipment, refining search methods, and learning what signs of life might actually look like can happen years before any spacecraft ever launches toward Europa or Enceladus. None of this proves life exists anywhere beyond Earth. Nobody has found so much as a single microbe on Europa or Enceladus, and no spacecraft has drilled through miles of ice to check. But every strange organism discovered thriving in total darkness at the bottom of our own planet quietly strengthens the case that life might not be nearly as rare or as picky about sunlight as scientists once assumed. Space agencies are already planning missions built around this exact idea. Future spacecraft could fly directly through the icy plumes erupting from Enceladus, sampling the spray for chemical signs of life without ever needing to land. Every lesson learned from studying chemosynthesis in the Mariana Trench feeds directly into how scientists design the instruments those spacecraft will eventually carry, hundreds of millions of miles from home. While researchers dream about alien oceans hundreds of millions of miles away, something far less inspiring has been quietly sinking into our own deepest trench for decades, a discovery that had nothing to do with ancient chemistry or distant moons, and everything to do with human carelessness. In 1998, a Japanese robotic submarine named Kaiko was exploring the Mariana Trench, capturing footage of the seafloor at a depth of roughly 35,000 feet. Its cameras were searching for signs of unusual geology and rare deep-sea life. Instead, drifting quietly across the screen, operators spotted something far more familiar and far more disturbing. A single-use plastic shopping bag, the same kind you might get from a grocery store, sitting at the very bottom of the ocean. At the time, almost nobody was thinking about ocean pollution reaching the deepest, most remote point on the entire planet. The Mariana Trench sits hundreds of miles from the nearest coastline, buried under nearly 7 miles of freezing water. If pollution could not be avoided down here of all places, it meant nowhere on Earth was truly untouched by human waste. That plastic bag turned out to be just the beginning. In 2019, when Victor Vescovo made his record-breaking solo dive into Challenger Deep, he reported seeing what appeared to be more plastic litter and candy wrapper packaging resting on the seafloor beside him, nearly 7 miles beneath the surface, in a place fewer humans have visited than the surface of the moon. Researchers eventually built something called the Deep Sea Debris Database, compiling photos and video footage collected from more than 5,000 submarine dives conducted over roughly 30 years. When scientists searched through that footage specifically looking for plastic waste, they confirmed the deepest piece of human trash ever documented. A plastic bag sitting at nearly 36,000 feet, the exact bottom of Challenger Deep itself. Building that database took years of painstaking work since most of the original footage had never been catalogued with pollution in mind. Researchers had to comb through decades of grainy video, frame by frame in some cases, searching for anything unnatural sitting among the mud and rock, an unglamorous kind of science that ended up producing one of the clearest warnings ever documented about how far human waste can actually travel. How does plastic litter, dropped or discarded near the surface, end up sinking nearly 7 miles down into the deepest trench on the planet? Ocean currents slowly carry floating debris across enormous distances. Eventually, waterlogged plastic becomes heavy enough to sink. Once it starts falling, gravity does the rest, pulling it down mile after mile until it eventually settles onto the seafloor of the deepest place gravity can take it, the bottom of a trench, acting almost like a funnel collecting trash from an entire ocean above it. This particular bag likely started its journey far from the Mariana Islands entirely, possibly drifting for years across open ocean before ever sinking. Scientists tracking ocean currents estimate that floating debris can travel thousands of miles from its original source, meaning trash dropped on a beach on one side of the Pacific could realistically end up settling at the very bottom of the world's deepest trench, an ocean away from wherever it started. A single plastic bag, spotted by chance on a grainy 1998 video feed, turned out to be a warning sign nobody fully understood at the time, because that visible bag on the seafloor was never the real problem. The real problem was already invisible, already spreading through every drop of water in the trench and about to show up inside the bodies of nearly every animal living down there. Fill a cup with water from the deepest part of the Mariana Trench, and according to scientific research, that single cup could contain up to 2,000 tiny fragments of plastic, pieces so small most of them are invisible without a microscope. Scientists call these fragments microplastics, broken down remnants of bottles, bags, fishing gear, and packaging that never fully disappear once they enter the ocean. Researchers from the Chinese Academy of Sciences studied water samples collected from multiple deep sea locations, including the Mariana Trench, and found microplastic concentrations far higher than most scientists expected at such extreme depths. In some samples, they even found more microplastic per liter of water in the trench than in some of the most heavily polluted rivers on the surface of the planet. This creates a genuinely strange contradiction. The Mariana Trench sits farther from a coastline, farther from any city, and farther from direct human contact than almost anywhere else on Earth. Logic would suggest it should be one of the cleanest places on the planet. Instead, deep ocean currents and the natural downward pull of gravity appear to be funneling plastic waste directly into trenches like this one, concentrating pollution instead of diluting it. Scientists studying deep ocean currents around the trench believe internal waves, slow-moving currents that move within different layers of water, may actually help push microplastic particles downward and trap them inside the trench itself. Rather than the plastic simply drifting to the bottom and stopping, the unique shape of the trench appears to be actively collecting and concentrating waste, almost like a A-funnel with no way for the plastic to escape once it settles inside. Microplastics found in the trench are not limited to obvious plastic types either. Researchers have identified fragments from polyester clothing fibers, packaging materials, and fishing equipment, each one a tiny signature of a specific human industry, all mixing together at the bottom of the most remote place on the entire planet. Testing water samples from this depth requires its own specialized equipment, since ordinary collection bottles can implode under pressure this extreme before they ever reach the surface with a usable sample. Scientists rely on pressure-resistant containers, specifically engineered to seal shut the instant they touch bottom, preserving an accurate snapshot of exactly what is floating through water nobody was ever supposed to reach in the first place. None of this plastic simply sits still once it reaches the bottom. It becomes part of the environment down there, settling into sediment, drifting through open water, and eventually crossing paths with nearly every living creature trying to survive in the trench, whether those creatures actively seek it out or not. The only deep sea location researchers found with even more microplastic than the Mariana Trench sits in the Arctic, near an observatory in the Greenland Sea, where samples revealed close to 3,400 pieces in a single liter. Comparing these two remote, freezing, sunless locations thousands of miles apart revealed the same disturbing pattern. The coldest, darkest, most isolated corners of our planet are turning into some of the most concentrated collection points for human waste anywhere on Earth. That last part turns out to be the most alarming detail of all, because scientists studying animals living inside the Mariana Trench were not just finding plastic scattered across the seafloor around them, they were finding it directly inside the bodies of the creatures themselves. For years, scientists suspected microplastic pollution might be reaching even the most remote corners of the ocean, but suspecting something and proving it are very different things. Then researchers began dissecting amphipods, the small shrimp-like scavengers that swarm the Mariana Trench floor, and what they found inside those tiny bodies confirmed one of their worst fears. In a study examining amphipods collected from 6 of the deepest ocean trenches on Earth, including the Mariana Trench, scientists found that more than 70% of the animals they examined had microplastic fragments sitting inside their digestive systems. These were not surface-dwelling creatures accidentally exposed to floating litter. These were animals living nearly 7 miles below the surface in one of the most isolated environments on the entire planet, and plastic was already inside them. On average, researchers found the highest concentration of ingested microplastic fragments in amphipods collected specifically from the Mariana Trench compared to every other trench included in the study, which also included the Japan, Isubonian, Kermadec, New Hebrides, and Peru-Chile trenches. Somehow, the deepest, most remote point on Earth had become the most contaminated location the scientists tested. Out of 6 extreme environments spread across 2 entirely different oceans, amphipods sit near the bottom of the trench's food chain, meaning nearly everything that eats them, including fish like the Mariana snailfish, is likely consuming those same plastic fragments indirectly, one meal at a time. Pollution introduced at the surface of the ocean was working its way steadily downward through an entire ecosystem, eventually settling inside animals that had never once been anywhere near a beach, a city, or a piece of human garbage floating on the surface. Scientists are still studying exactly how microplastic affects the health of deep-sea animals over time. Some early research suggests these tiny fragments can physically block digestive systems or slowly release trace chemicals into an animal's body as the plastic breaks down further. Because deep-sea creatures already live on the edge of survival with extremely limited food and energy to spare, any added biological stress from swallowing plastic could carry consequences scientists have barely begun to measure or understand. Some researchers worry this contamination could eventually work its way back up toward human beings as well, since amphipods and small fish from these depths sit at the base of a much larger food web stretching all the way up to species that humans actively fish and eat from waters far above the trench itself. Tracking that connection all the way from a trench amphipod to a dinner plate remains difficult, but the basic pathway, plastic moving steadily up through a food chain, is already well documented in shallower parts of the ocean. This discovery forced a lot of researchers to rethink what remote and untouched actually means anymore. For decades, the Mariana Trench symbolized one of the last truly wild, unexplored places left on the planet. Instead, evidence kept piling up that human waste had already arrived there first. long before most scientists ever had, quietly working its way into an ecosystem nobody even knew still existed. Researchers examining amphipods from the Mariana Trench specifically found an average of more than 3 fragments inside each individual animal they dissected, the highest average recorded across every trench included in the study. For creatures barely bigger than a fingernail, 3 separate pieces of plastic represents a genuinely enormous share of their tiny bodies, a burden no animal down here ever evolved to carry. Beneath every rock, inside every scoop of mud, and floating through every drop of water in the Mariana Trench live countless numbers of microscopic organisms far too small to see with the naked eye. For a long time, scientists assumed these microbes were mostly similar to bacteria found elsewhere in the ocean. A massive research project proved that assumption completely wrong. Researchers from Shanghai Jiaotong University, working alongside scientists from several other institutions, spent years collecting and analyzing microbial samples from deep inside the Mariana Trench. When they finally sequenced the genetic material they had gathered, the results were staggering. Roughly 89% of the microbial species identified in their samples had never been recorded by science before, anywhere on the planet. Think about what that actually means. Out of every 100 different types of microscopic life the team discovered living in this single trench, close to 90 of them were completely new to human knowledge, species with no name, no prior research, and no existing place in any scientific record before this study. This level of previously undiscovered life is almost unheard of in modern biology. Most environments on Earth, even remote ones, have already been sampled and studied extensively enough that new discoveries, while still exciting, tend to represent a small percentage of what researchers find. The Mariana Trench turned that pattern completely upside down, revealing what scientists now describe as a hidden empire of microscopic life that had simply never been studied at all. The research team also discovered something unexpected about how these microbes survive. Rather than life shaped mostly by random chance, the way many scientists assumed extreme environments worked, the study found that specific environmental pressures inside the trench, like intense cold, crushing pressure, and limited food, were actively shaping which microbial traits survived and which ones did not. Some microbes evolved to become highly specialized, thriving in one narrow set of conditions. Others evolved to become flexible generalists, capable of surviving across a wider range of harsh environments within the trench. This matters far beyond simple curiosity. Some of these newly discovered microbes contained unique proteins and enzymes capable of functioning normally under pressure that would destroy proteins found in nearly every other organism on the planet. Scientists studying these pressure-resistant molecules believe they could eventually lead to breakthroughs in medicine, industrial manufacturing, and biotechnology, once researchers fully understand how they work. Collecting these microbes in the first place required specialized equipment most laboratories simply do not own. Samples have to be sealed inside pressurized containers the instant they leave the seafloor, preventing the crushing conditions these organisms depend on from suddenly disappearing during the long trip back up to the surface. Lose that pressure too quickly, and the delicate microbial life inside can die before a single scientist ever gets the chance to study it. An entire unseen world, hiding in mud nearly 7 miles beneath the surface, had been thriving completely unnoticed for who knows how long, until scientists finally went looking closely enough to find it. This single study also relied on genetic sequencing technology that barely existed a decade earlier, allowing researchers to identify organisms directly from fragments of their genetic material, rather than needing to grow each one successfully in a laboratory first, a technique that has quietly transformed how quickly scientists can catalog hidden life anywhere on the planet. And microbes were not the only trench residents forcing scientists to throw out old assumptions. One particular deep-sea fish was about to break a rule researchers thought they had already figured out completely. For years, scientists studying deep-sea fish believed they had figured out a reliable pattern. As fish live deeper and deeper in the ocean, their bodies produce increasing amounts of a chemical compound called TMAO, short for trimethylamine oxide, a molecule that helps stabilize proteins and keep cells functioning properly under crushing pressure. The deeper the fish lived, according to this pattern, the more TMAO scientists expected to find inside its body. Researchers studying fish collected from the Mariana Trench decided to test this pattern directly, examining 11 different species of deep-sea fish living at extreme depths. Based on decades of prior research, they expected TMAO levels to keep climbing steadily the deeper each fish species lived, eventually reaching some kind of maximum protective level near the very bottom of the trench. Instead, the data completely contradicted that expectation. Rather than continuing to rise with depth the way scientists predicted, TMAO levels in some of the deepest living fish species actually leveled off, or in certain cases appeared to decrease, breaking a pattern that had been treated almost like an established rule of deep-sea biology for years. This unexpected result left researchers with a genuine mystery instead of a tidy confirmation. If TMAO alone cannot fully explain how fish survive the most extreme pressure on the planet, some other biological mechanism must be helping stabilize their cells and proteins once they cross a certain depth threshold, something scientists have not yet identified or fully understood. Discoveries like this highlight something important about science itself. A theory that works perfectly well for years, supported by real data and careful research, can still turn out to be incomplete once scientists gather enough new evidence from a place as extreme and understudied as the Mariana Trench. Nobody was wrong on purpose. The trench simply held information nobody had been able to properly test before. Some researchers involved in the study admitted the result genuinely surprised them, since the original pattern connecting TMAO to depth had been treated almost like settled science across multiple prior studies covering different oceans and different fish families entirely. Watching that pattern break down at the exact bottom of the deepest trench on the planet suggested the rule itself may have only ever been half complete. Researchers are now exploring several other possible explanations, including different protective proteins, changes in cell membrane structure, and other chemical adaptations unique to extreme depth. Untangling the real answer could take years of additional research, additional expeditions, and additional trips down into one of the most difficult environments on the planet to study directly. The same research project studying these 11 fish species also examined an amphipod living across an enormous range of depth, from around 6,800 feet all the way down to the very bottom of the trench, roughly 11,000 meters. Watching a single species survive across that entire range, adjusting its biology at every stage along the way, gave scientists one of their clearest windows yet into how animals gradually adapt to deeper and deeper pressure over the course of a single lifetime. Every rule broken like this reminds scientists just how much remains unknown about life in the Mariana Trench, and it is far from the only place inside this trench still keeping secrets. Because while biologists were busy rewriting the rules of fish biology, geologists studying the trench floor were uncovering something happening far beneath it, something building slowly, deep inside the earth itself. The Mariana Trench is not just a deep hole sitting quietly on the ocean floor. It marks the boundary of one of the most powerful geological forces on the entire planet, the exact spot where two massive tectonic plates are colliding, one sliding slowly beneath the other in a process called subduction. That constant grinding collision is the same basic force responsible for some of the most devastating earthquakes in recorded history. To study this hidden collision more closely, scientists placed a network of 12 underwater listening devices, called ocean bottom seismometers, directly around Challenger Deep. Over just 6 months, those instruments detected nearly 2,000 separate earthquakes happening in the immediate area, far more seismic activity than researchers originally expected from a region many had assumed was relatively stable. Some of those earthquakes were traced to depths of over 30 miles beneath the seafloor, deeper than scientists previously believed was possible in this particular region. That unexpected depth told researchers something important. Large amounts of water are being dragged down into the Earth's mantle along with the subducting plate, far deeper than older models had predicted, fundamentally changing scientists' understanding of how this entire subduction zone actually behaves underground. Water matters more than it might seem. When water gets pulled down into the extremely hot rock of the mantle, can lower the melting point of surrounding rock and influence pressure building up along fault lines. Understanding exactly how much water moved through a subduction zone like this one helps scientists build far more accurate predictions about future earthquake activity in the region, instead of relying on outdated assumptions from decades ago. The team analyzing this data relied on software trained using machine learning, sorting through months of raw seismic recordings far faster than any human researcher could manage by hand. That kind of automated analysis is quickly becoming standard practice across earthquake science, letting researchers process years of backlogged data from underwater listening devices in a fraction of the time it once required. For years, some geophysicists actually believed the unusual geometry of the Mariana subduction zone made it unlikely to produce an extremely powerful earthquake, because of the steep angle at which the Pacific plate bends downward here. That assumption was seriously challenged after devastating megathrust earthquakes struck other regions once considered similarly unlikely, including Sumatra in 2004 and Japan in 2011, both catastrophic events that surprised scientists who had studied those regions for years. Historical records show the Mariana region has already generated real consequences from underwater earthquakes. In 1826 and again in 1872, earthquakes near the trench triggered local tsunamis. More recently, an earthquake near Guam in 1993 caused significant damage to buildings and roads across the island. Some geophysicists now believe the region is capable of producing an earthquake reaching magnitude 8.5, a shift in thinking that would have seemed unreasonable to many researchers only a couple of decades ago. None of this means a massive earthquake is guaranteed anytime soon, but scientists monitoring the Mariana Trench are no longer treating it as a quiet, low-risk region. It is an active, powerful, still shifting piece of our planet's crust, generating nearly 2,000 earthquakes in half a year alone, mostly too small and too deep for anyone on the surface to ever notice. The real question keeping some researchers awake at night is not whether this region can produce a major earthquake. It is what happens to nearby coastlines if one large enough ever does. For decades, scientists treated the Mariana Trench as one single continuous feature stretching across the ocean floor, a single long crack in the Earth's crust. Recent research completely changed that picture. A detailed study led by researchers at Newcastle University, working alongside the British Geological Survey, revealed that the trench is not one unified habitat at all. It is actually 5 separate, isolated sections, cut off from each other by ridges and geological barriers running across the seafloor. This discovery matters far more than it might first appear. If the trench is truly split into 5 disconnected zones, animals living in one section may be almost completely cut off from animals living in another, even though both groups exist inside what maps have always labeled as a single, connected trench. Species could be evolving separately, adapting to slightly different local conditions, quietly becoming their own distinct populations without anyone realizing it. Researchers involved in this mapping project used detailed sonar surveys to measure ridges and barriers running across the seafloor, features tall enough to genuinely restrict how animals and even ocean currents move between sections. In places, these barriers rise high enough to function almost like underwater mountain ranges, separating neighborhoods of trench life that might otherwise have blended together into one continuous population over millions of years. The same research team uncovered something even bigger hiding in plain sight. Scientists have always focused their attention on trenches themselves when studying extreme deep ocean habitats, the dramatic canyon like features carved by colliding tectonic plates. But trenches are only part of a much larger environment scientists call the Hadal Zone, covering any part of the ocean deeper than about 13,000 feet. When researchers properly measured every Hadal environment across the northwest Pacific Ocean, not just the famous trenches, they discovered something shocking. The total Hadal area turned out to be roughly 4 times larger than trenches alone account for, an area of ocean floor comparable in size to Alaska, Texas, and Montana combined, hiding in plain sight the entire time, simply because nobody had bothered to measure it properly before. Much of this newly recognized Hadal territory consists of smaller, less dramatic features like fracture zones and deep ocean basins, places without the fame or name recognition of the Mariana Trench, but sharing many of the same extreme conditions, crushing pressure, total darkness, and near freezing temperatures. This changes how scientists think about deep ocean life entirely. Instead of picturing a handful of famous, isolated trenches scattered rarely across the map, researchers now understand the Hadal Zone as a sprawling, interconnected network of extreme habitats, far larger and far more widespread than anyone previously mapped or imagined. Researchers involved in this study even discovered that one of these 5 sections had already been given a name decades earlier by Russian oceanographers, who called it the Volcano Trench, a name that had mostly faded from modern maps and modern memory before this research brought it back into focus. The Mariana Trench, already one of the strangest places on the planet, turned out to be even stranger than expected. Not one single crack in the earth, but 5 separate hidden worlds, sitting inside an even larger, mostly unmapped frontier most people have never even heard of, stretching quietly beneath the waves across an entire ocean. Somewhere at the bottom of the Mariana Trench sits water that has not touched the ocean surface, or felt direct sunlight in longer than most civilizations have existed. Scientists studying deep currents around Challenger Deep discovered that circulation this far down moves so slowly and remains so isolated from the rest of the ocean that some water trapped inside the trench may be more than 2,000 years old before it ever mixes with fresher water again. To understand why, imagine the entire global ocean as one giant, slow-moving conveyor belt, constantly circulating water from the surface down to the depths and eventually back up again over the course of centuries. This global system is sometimes called the ocean conveyor belt, and the Mariana Trench sits at what scientists consider the very end of that journey, the final, most isolated stop water reaches before circulation essentially grinds to a halt. Once water settles into the deepest parts of the trench, it becomes almost completely cut off from the currents and mixing patterns happening in the rest of the ocean above it. Surrounded by walls of rock nearly 7 miles beneath the surface, that water has almost nowhere left to go, and very little new water flowing in to replace it or stir it around. This does not mean the trench is perfectly still and silent. Occasional deep internal waves, subtle currents rippling far beneath the surface, along with small disturbances triggered by nearby earthquakes, still create slow, faint movement within the trench. But compared to nearly every other part of the ocean, water down here moves at an almost frozen pace, cut off from the powerful currents and seasonal changes happening in the sunlit world above. Scientists studying this ancient, slow-moving water are especially interested in how it affects chemistry and life at these extreme depths. Water isolated for centuries, or possibly millennia, accumulates its own unique chemical signature over time, different from water circulating closer to the surface. potentially shaping which organisms can survive there and how nutrients move through this isolated ecosystem. This isolation may also help explain why so many species discovered in the Mariana Trench turn up nowhere else on the planet. When water barely moves, the animals and microbes living inside it rarely get the chance to drift into neighboring habitats or to mix with populations from other trenches. Over enough centuries, that kind of separation can quietly shape entirely new species, evolving in a bubble sealed off from the rest of the ocean. Researchers use specialized current meters, lowered on cables and left in place for months at a time, just to measure how slowly water actually moves at these depths. The readings often come back astonishingly small, sometimes barely faster than a snail crossing a sidewalk, confirming just how still and undisturbed this ancient pocket of the ocean genuinely is compared to the churning currents visible near the surface. There's something genuinely strange about touching water at the bottom of the Mariana Trench and realizing it may have last mixed freely with the rest of the ocean around the time ancient civilizations were still being built on the surface far above. Time itself seems to move differently down here, locked into one of the slowest, most isolated corners of the entire planet. Scattered across parts of the deep ocean floor near the Mariana region sit strange, dark, potato-shaped lumps of rock called polymetallic nodules. They form incredibly slowly, growing at a rate of just a few millimeters every million years, as metal particles dissolved in seawater gradually settle and harden around a tiny core, sometimes an old shark tooth or a fragment of shell. These unassuming rocks have suddenly become extremely valuable. Polymetallic nodules contain meaningful concentrations of metals like manganese, nickel, cobalt, and copper, materials increasingly in demand for manufacturing, batteries, electronics, and equipment used in renewable energy technology around the world. As demand for these metals grows, companies and governments have started looking seriously at the deep ocean floor as a potential new mining frontier. Research groups working with organizations like NOAA and the United States Geological Survey have specifically explored areas in and around the Mariana Trench region using autonomous underwater vehicles, robotic submarines capable of mapping and sampling the seafloor without a human pilot on board. Their goal is to better understand exactly how many of these mineral-rich nodules exist down here and what role they might play in future mining efforts. These surveys often combine sonar mapping with actual physical samples collected by robotic arms, building a picture of nodule density across huge stretches of seafloor that would take an impossibly long time to examine using human divers or even crewed submersibles alone. Mining nodules from nearly 6 miles beneath the ocean surface is nowhere close to simple. Any mining operation would need specialized equipment capable of surviving crushing pressure, freezing temperatures, and complete darkness, while somehow collecting rocks scattered across the seafloor without destroying the fragile ecosystem living directly on top of them. Engineers have proposed massive, tractor-like machines designed to crawl along the seafloor collecting nodules, sending them up through a long pipe to a ship waiting on the surface. Building a machine that can survive years of continuous operation under this kind of pressure, without a single major breakdown thousands of feet from the nearest repair crew, remains one of the biggest unsolved engineering challenges standing between today's prototypes and any large-scale mining operation actually beginning. That fragile ecosystem is exactly what worries scientists the most. Many of the same slow-growing organisms discussed throughout this trench, xenophyophores, sponges, delicate corals, and countless still undiscovered species live directly on or around these nodule fields. Removing the nodules themselves would also mean physically destroying the only hard surface many of these creatures depend on to survive in the first place. Marine biologists studying these regions warn that deep-sea ecosystems recover incredibly slowly, if they recover at all. Because nodules take millions of years to form, and because life at these depths already grows and reproduces at a fraction of the speed seen near the surface, damage caused by large-scale mining could last for generations, possibly far longer than any human industry actually operating down here. The Mariana Trench, already carrying the weight of falling marine snow, ancient earthquakes and drifting plastic waste, now sits at the center of a very different kind of pressure entirely, an economic one, as industries begin eyeing the deepest part of the ocean as a resource waiting to be extracted rather than an ecosystem still barely understood. Not everyone studying the Mariana region agrees that mining the deep ocean floor is a good idea, and the disagreement has turned into one of the most heated debates in modern ocean science. On one side stand mining companies and some government officials arguing that deep sea metals are essential for building batteries and clean energy technology the world desperately needs. On the other side stand hundreds of marine scientists warning that humanity barely understands these ecosystems well enough to start tearing them apart. The core of the disagreement comes down to a simple, uncomfortable fact. Scientists have explored only a tiny fraction of the deep ocean floor in any real detail. Some researchers argue that starting large-scale mining operations before finishing that research risks permanently destroying species and entire ecosystems that nobody has even discovered yet, let alone studied closely enough to protect. Supporters of deep-sea mining counter that responsible regulations, careful site selection, and modern monitoring technology can limit environmental damage while still accessing metals the world genuinely needs. They point out that mining on land also causes serious environmental harm and argue that comparing the two forms of damage fairly requires looking at the whole picture, not just the ocean floor in isolation. International organizations have stepped into the middle of this fight, working to create rules and guidelines for any future deep-sea mining that might happen in international waters, areas that do not belong to any single country. These negotiations move slowly, partly because scientists keep discovering new reasons for caution every time a fresh expedition returns from the deep ocean with footage of yet another previously unknown species. Representatives from dozens of countries have spent years debating exactly how these rules should work, meeting repeatedly to hammer out regulations covering everything from environmental review standards to how profits from any future mining might eventually get shared among nations that never actually participate in the mining itself. Some marine biologists have specifically called for a full pause on deep-sea mining until scientists complete far more thorough research on these ecosystems, giving researchers enough time to understand what exactly might be lost before industrial equipment ever touches the seafloor. Mining supporters argue that indefinite delays could slow down the transition to cleaner energy technology that the whole planet urgently needs. Several major companies and a growing number of countries have already announced their own moratoriums, agreeing to avoid deep-sea mining projects until stronger environmental protections exist. Other nations continue pushing forward with test mining operations, arguing that waiting any longer risks falling behind in a global race for materials every modern economy increasingly depends on. Neither side is entirely wrong, and neither side has an easy answer. The Mariana Trench and the wider Hadal zone surrounding it sits directly in the middle of this global argument, a place most people will never see with their own eyes, yet one that could shape decisions about energy, technology, and conservation for decades to come. Public opinion is starting to play a role in the debate as well, as more people watch footage of strange, previously unknown deep-sea creatures and begin asking harder questions about what exactly might be lost before scientists ever finish documenting it. Whatever happens next, one thing is already certain. Every choice made about this remote, hidden world will be decided almost entirely by people who have never actually been there. Sending a human being to the bottom of the Mariana Trench remains one of the most difficult, expensive, and dangerous things anyone can attempt. A single crewed dive can take years of preparation, cost millions of dollars, and still carries genuine risk of catastrophic failure. That is exactly why most modern exploration of the trench no longer relies on humans at all. It relies on robots. Remotely operated vehicles, controlled by pilots sitting safely aboard a ship far above, can dive repeatedly without ever risking a human life at the bottom. These robotic submarines carry high-definition cameras, mechanical arms for collecting samples, and sensors capable of measuring chemistry, temperature, and pressure throughout an entire dive, sending that information back up through a long cable connecting the robot to the surface. Autonomous underwater vehicles take this idea one step further. Unlike remotely operated vehicles, these robots operate completely on their own, with no cable and no direct human control once they begin a mission. Engineers program a route in advance, release the vehicle into the water, and wait for it to complete its survey and return safely to the surface, hours or even days later, having explored areas of seafloor no cable could ever safely reach. Losing radio contact with an autonomous vehicle for hours at a time used to fill research teams with genuine anxiety, uncertain whether their expensive equipment had simply gone quiet or been lost entirely somewhere in the dark. Improved navigation and battery technology have made these missions far more reliable in recent years, though every recovery still draws a small crowd on deck, watching anxiously for a robot to resurface exactly where it was supposed to. Modern expeditions near the Mariana region have started combining both types of robots with something newer still: artificial intelligence trained specifically to recognize deep-sea animals in real time. Researchers have built massive databases of underwater footage, feeding thousands of images into computer systems that gradually learn to identify different species swimming past a robot's camera, flagging anything unusual for scientists to examine more closely later. This technology is already changing how quickly new discoveries happen. Instead of scientists manually reviewing every single hour of footage after an expedition ends, artificial intelligence can scan through recordings almost instantly, highlighting moments worth a closer look and dramatically speeding up the pace of new discoveries in a place that used to reveal its secrets extremely slowly. One autonomous vehicle, nicknamed Orpheus, has become a regular presence on recent Mariana expeditions, built specifically to explore terrain considered too steep, too rocky, or too risky for larger, more expensive vehicles. Engineers designed it to be affordable enough that losing one to a technical failure would not derail an entire research program, letting scientists take bigger risks exploring genuinely unmapped terrain than they ever could with a single priceless submersible on board. None of this technology completely replaces human curiosity. Scientists still design every mission, interpret every result, and make the final call on what discoveries actually mean. But robots and artificial intelligence have turned a place once visited by only a handful of people across an entire century into an environment now surveyed regularly, opening a door into the Mariana Trench that stays open far more often than it ever used to. You might assume that after more than 60 years of exploration, scientists have already found and catalogued most of what lives in the Mariana region. That assumption could not be further from the truth. New species, new geological features, and new mysteries continue turning up almost every time a research vessel returns to these waters, sometimes within the very same year. In the spring of 2025, the research vessel Nautilus spent 21 days exploring deep-sea habitats around the Mariana Islands, using remotely operated vehicles and autonomous robots to survey underwater volcanoes, hydrothermal vents, and previously unmapped sections of ocean floor. The expedition worked alongside an organization called Ocean Sensors, which specifically embeds trained deep-sea biologists directly into expeditions like this one, accelerating the process of identifying brand new species instead of waiting years for footage to be reviewed after the fact. That same year, separate teams of researchers used autonomous underwater vehicles to investigate mineral-rich areas of the Mariana region, gathering data that continues feeding into our understanding of both the geology and biology hiding across this massive, still largely unmapped stretch of ocean floor. An embedded deep-sea biologist joined the 2025 expedition specifically to accelerate the identification process, working directly alongside the ship's engineers and pilots instead of waiting months for footage to be shipped off to a university lab somewhere else in the world. Large portions of the Mariana Trench Marine National Monument, the protected area covering much of this region, remain either completely unmapped or only roughly characterized, despite decades of scientific interest and multiple record-breaking expeditions. Every new mission tends to reveal something nobody expected, whether that means a strange new species drifting past the camera, or an entirely unmapped volcanic feature rising unexpectedly from the seafloor. Funding for these expeditions often comes together from a patchwork of government agencies, universities, and private partners, each contributing ships, equipment, or specialized expertise that no single organization could easily afford alone. That kind of collaboration has become essential simply to keep exploration moving forward at any meaningful pace. This steady stream of new discoveries says something important about the trench itself. Unlike a jungle or a mountain range that scientists can walk through directly, exploring the deep ocean requires expensive ships, specialized robots, and highly trained crews, meaning only a tiny handful of expeditions ever reach these depths in any given year. Each mission barely scratches the surface of an area covering thousands of square miles. The 2025 Nautilus expedition alone logged well over 100 hours of underwater dive time, exploring some of the most volcanically active seafloor found anywhere near the Mariana Islands. Every one of those hours produced footage that specialists are still working through, cataloging potential new species and unusual geological features long after the ship itself has already returned to port. Scientists studying the Mariana region openly admit that most of what remains to be discovered here has not been found simply because nobody has looked closely enough yet, not because the trench has finally run out of secrets. Every expedition that returns with new footage confirms the same basic truth. This place is nowhere close to being fully explored, and it may not be for a very long time. Here is a fact that surprises almost everyone the first time they hear it. Humanity has better, more detailed maps of the surface of Mars, a planet more than 140 million miles away, than we have of the ocean floor sitting directly beneath our own ships. Space agencies have photographed the entire surface of Mars in detail sharp enough to spot boulders the size of a car. Huge sections of Earth's own seafloor have never been mapped with anywhere near that level of detail. Fewer than 30 people in all of human history have ever reached the bottom of the Mariana Trench. Compare that to space exploration. More than 600 people have traveled into outer space since the 1960s. More people have walked on the surface of the moon, nearly 240,000 miles away, than have ever touched the deepest point of our own planet's ocean floor. Think about how strange that comparison really is. Reaching the moon requires escaping the entire pull of Earth's gravity, crossing empty space with no air, no water, and no way to breathe without carrying your own supply. Reaching the bottom of the Mariana Trench only requires traveling 7 miles straight down through water that exists right here on our own planet, and somehow humanity still finds the moon easier to reach. Even when scientists do reach the trench, they only ever explore an incredibly small piece of it at a time. A single dive might cover a few hundred feet of seafloor out of a trench system stretching across thousands of square miles once every isolated section and surrounding heddle zone gets included. Researchers studying ocean trenches note that the very deepest parts of any trench, the sections capturing most public attention and imagination, actually make up only about 1% or less of the trench's total area. This gap in exploration is not because scientists lack curiosity. It comes down to cost, difficulty, and risk. Sending a robot or a submersible nearly 7 miles beneath the ocean's surface requires specialized engineering, enormous amounts of funding, and weeks of careful planning for even a single short dive. Space missions, as expensive as they are, often receive dramatically more public funding and attention than deep ocean research ever has. A single research expedition to a trench like the Mariana can cost several $1,000,000 once a ship, crew, fuel, and specialized robotic equipment are all accounted for, and that price tag buys only a handful of actual dives before the mission has to head back to port. Ask most people to picture something entirely unexplored, and they usually imagine deep space, distant planets, or the far edges of the universe. Almost nobody pictures the ocean floor sitting directly beneath ships crossing the Pacific every single day. Yet, by nearly every honest measure, humanity understands the surface of Mars, a planet we have never physically visited, better than we understand the deepest trench sitting quietly on our own home world. Every chapter in this video represents a tiny fragment of information pulled from a place still shrouded in almost total mystery. The creatures, the chemistry, the earthquakes, and the pollution described here are simply the pieces scientists have managed to find so far, scattered clues from an investigation that has barely begun. Somewhere down there, in the vast stretches of trench floor, no camera has ever reached, entire species, entire ecosystems, and entire geological features are almost certainly still waiting, completely unknown, for someone to finally notice them. Beyond strange creatures and record-breaking dives, the Mariana Trench quietly performs a job most people never think about at all. It helps regulate the planet's climate. Deep ocean trenches act as natural storage sites for carbon, pulling material out of the active climate system near the surface and locking it away in sediment for extremely long periods of time. Here's how the process actually works. Marine snow, that slow drizzle of dead organic material falling from the sunlit surface down toward the trench floor, carries carbon along with it every single time it sinks. Once that material settles into trench sediment, especially in a place as isolated and undisturbed as the Mariana Trench, it can remain locked away for thousands of years instead of cycling back into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. Scientists studying this process believe trenches may sequester carbon more effectively than many other parts of the ocean floor, partly because of their unique shape. Steep trench walls funnel sediment downward and concentrate it at the bottom, rather than letting it spread out thinly across a flat seafloor the way it might elsewhere. Earthquakes common in this region can also trigger sudden landslides of sediment, rapidly burying organic material and locking away carbon even faster than normal, slow-settling would. Researchers have measured this effect directly after major earthquakes struck other deep trenches nearby, finding sudden spikes in buried organic material immediately following a large seismic event, evidence that a single earthquake can bury more carbon in a matter of hours than years of gradual, everyday sediment drift ever could. This matters enormously for understanding climate change on a global scale. Every bit of carbon permanently trapped at the bottom of a trench is carbon that stays out of the atmosphere, where it would otherwise contribute to warming the planet. Scientists are still working to measure exactly how much carbon trenches like the Mariana actually store, and how sensitive that storage process might be to changes happening in the ocean above. Researchers studying sediment cores pulled from trench floors have found layers of buried organic material stacked on top of each other like pages in a book, each layer representing a snapshot of ocean conditions from a different point in Earth history. Reading through these layers gives scientists a rare, detailed record of how carbon storage in the deep ocean has shifted over thousands of years, long before anyone was measuring the climate directly. There's a genuine irony hiding in this discovery. The same deep, isolated darkness that makes the Mariana Trench feel so disconnected from daily human life is actually helping stabilize the very climate every person on the surface depends on, working silently, nearly 7 miles down, completely unnoticed by almost everyone whose lives it quietly protects. Some climate scientists now argue that protecting deep trenches from disturbance, including from mining and pollution, should be treated as seriously as protecting rainforests, since both quietly remove carbon from circulation in ways the planet has come to depend on over thousands of years. Understanding this hidden connection raises the stakes on nearly everything discussed so far. Pollution, mining, and unstudied ecosystems are not just distant curiosities happening in a place nobody will ever visit. They may be directly tied to a natural system helping regulate the entire planet's climate, adding real consequences to every decision made about a place most people will spend their entire lives never thinking about at all. After everything explored so far, the strange creatures, the ancient chemistry, the shifting earthquakes, and the drifting plastic, the Mariana Trench still holds more questions than answers. Scientists studying this region openly admit that some of the most basic facts about the trench remain genuinely uncertain, even after more than 60 years of exploration. Nobody knows exactly how many species actually live down there. Every expedition tends to uncover new organisms, yet no one can say with any confidence how close scientists are to finding everything, or whether entire groups of animals remain completely undiscovered in sections of the trench nobody has properly explored yet. Nobody fully understands how isolated the trench's 5 separate sections truly are from each other. Some scientists suspect certain species might drift between sections occasionally, carried by rare deep currents or unusual events. Others believe the barriers separating these zones are strong enough to have created entirely distinct, independently evolving populations. Settling that question would require years of additional genetic research, comparing animals collected from each isolated section individually. Nobody has fully solved the TMAO mystery, the strange reversal researchers found in certain deep-sea fish that broke a rule scientists had trusted for years. Until researchers identify whatever alternative mechanism protects those fish instead, an important piece of understanding how life survives extreme pressure remains genuinely unexplained. Nobody has confirmed exactly which basin inside Challenger Deep actually holds the record for the single deepest point on the planet, since every new survey keeps producing slightly different measurements separated by only a matter of feet. Nobody can say for certain whether the still unnamed, motionless jellyfish filmed drifting near the Enigma seamount represents a species entirely new to science, or something already documented but never observed behaving quite this way before. Without a physical specimen collected and studied directly, that mystery remains open, and nobody knows exactly how deep sea mining, ongoing pollution, and a warming climate above will ultimately affect an ecosystem already living at the absolute edge of survival, an ecosystem scientists have only begun to understand within the last few decades. Nobody even knows with real confidence exactly how many creatures like the supergiant amphipod or the giant isopod exist scattered across the wider Hadal zone, since most of that newly recognized territory, an area larger than 3 American states combined, has barely been surveyed at all. For every strange animal already caught on camera, researchers suspect an unknown number of equally strange relatives are still waiting somewhere in the vast unexplored stretches surrounding the trench itself. Every unanswered question here is not a failure of science. It is an honest acknowledgement of just how little humanity actually knows about the most extreme environment on our own planet, a place hidden not by distance, the way outer space is hidden, but by pressure, darkness, and cost. Some of these questions may take another 60 years to answer, the same span of time separating today from that first quiet dive inside the Trieste back in 1960. Others might get resolved within the next decade, as robots, artificial intelligence, and cheaper technology keep opening the trench up to more frequent study. The trench keeps its secrets extremely well, and every answer scientists manage to uncover seems to reveal 2 or 3 brand new questions waiting right behind it. 7 miles beneath the surface of the Pacific Ocean, in a place colder and darker than almost anywhere else on the planet, life did not just survive, it figured out how to thrive. Fish evolved bodies without bones. Bacteria learned to eat chemistry instead of sunlight. A single cell grew large enough to hold in your hand. None of this happened by accident. It happened because life, given enough time, will find a way into almost anywhere. Pressure, darkness, and cold allow it to exist at all. That single idea reaches far beyond this one trench. If life can adapt to conditions this extreme on Earth, hidden from sunlight, crushed under pressure equal to 50 jumbo jets, surviving on nothing but scraps drifting down from far above, then the universe suddenly feels a little less impossible for life to exist somewhere else entirely. Icy moons like Europa and Enceladus, hiding oceans of their own beneath miles of frozen crust, no longer seem like such an unreasonable place to imagine something alive. Every strange survival trick covered in this video, the bones that dissolved away, the chemistry that builds its own food from rock, the single cell large enough to hold, exists as proof that the boundary between possible and impossible is far blurrier than most people ever imagine. At the same time, the Mariana Trench tells a second story, a far more uncomfortable one. Human waste has already reached the deepest, most remote point on the entire planet, arriving there decades before most scientists ever did. Plastic bags, microplastic fragments, and industrial chemicals now sit permanently mixed into water older than written history, inside animals that will never once encounter a human being directly. Nowhere on Earth, it turns out, was ever truly out of reach, and beneath all of it, the ground itself keeps moving. Tectonic plates grinding together in the dark, building toward earthquakes and tsunamis that could someday reach coastlines thousands of miles away. A quiet, ongoing reminder that this trench is not a frozen postcard. It is an active, living, shifting part of our planet, still being shaped today exactly the way it has been shaped for millions of years. Scientists have explored less than 1% of this trench in any real detail. Every single dive so far has returned with something nobody expected, a fish that breaks the rules, a chemical reaction that might explain the origin of life, a jellyfish still waiting for a name. 65 years ago, 2 men in a metal ball spent 20 minutes at the bottom of this trench and proved life could exist there at all. Since then, a handful of pilots, a fleet of robots, and a growing army of scientists have spent decades chasing everything that first glimpse left unanswered. The chase is nowhere near finished. Whatever remains hidden down there, waiting in permanent darkness for the next camera, the next submersible, the next curious mind willing to look, one thing already feels certain. The deepest place on Earth still has far more to reveal than anyone has managed to uncover so far. Somewhere out there, another dark, crushing, unexplored corner of this planet is waiting for exactly the same kind of attention this trench finally received, waiting for someone curious enough to point a camera into the dark and simply look. If this journey to the bottom of the world left you as amazed as it left us, hit subscribe because the next mystery is already waiting.